Brilliant. Okay, we are now recording. Right, so welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm just going to share my screen and we will get going. Brilliant. So, as I said, my name is Mpula Lawton and I wear many hats. One of the hats that I wear is that I am the founder of an organization called Arise, which stands for Anti-Racism in Schools and Education. And through Arise, I do many, many things. I go to schools all over the world and I talk about anti-racism with children, and I talk about anti-racism with young people and with their parents and guardians and also teachers. And the reason I started Arise was because I used to be a teacher. I actually did a teaching placement at Rhodes Avenue when I was training to be a teacher. And unfortunately, even though, you know, this is London and it's a very diverse place, I experienced a lot of racism. And I always used to think to myself, wow, I wish we had, you know, anti-racism training in the same way that we have safeguarding training, or the same way that we have, you know, fire safety training and things like that. I think anti-racism training is really important. But at the time, nobody seemed to be doing it. So I decided that that's what I was going to do. So I founded Arise. And outside of Arise, I am also a lawyer, and the type of law that I'm particularly interested in is employment law and equality law and all of that good stuff. So that's me and a little bit about my background and my squiggly career, but we're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about anti-racism. So this is the session overview. We're going to have a quick introduction and kind of go over the reasons as to why this is so important. And then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty about how to actually talk to your children about race. We're also going to look at dealing with racist incidents. So what happens if your child is the victim of racism, and what happens if your child is the perpetrator. We'll then have time to kind of do a Q&A session, and then we will wrap up and I'll let you get on with your evening. So that's what this webinar is looking like. So let's get into it. Why should we even bother having these conversations? It's really interesting how many people I meet and they say, yeah, but they're children, they don't see color. And why should we talk to children about race? And I have to disagree with that. Children absolutely do see color. How do I know? Because as a teacher, when I taught year groups as young as nursery and reception, it was one of the things that the children would always mention. They would say to me, oh, Miss Lawton, your skin is brown, or Miss Lawton, why are we different? And things like that. And sometimes children would say things that were quite unkind with regards to difference in skin tone and skin color. So I think children do see race. We also need to prepare children for the real world and equip them with the tools to be anti-racist. So it's absolutely fine, actually, that they see race and they notice skin color. What's not fine is when that is seen as a negative and presented as a negative. So it's really important that we, you know, that we encourage them to talk about race and think about race positively, and we give them the tools to be actively anti-racist. Why else do we need to have this conversation? Well, because if you don't talk about it, it will become taboo. Race will become a taboo, and racism and matters with regards to racism will remain unchanged. So what we don't want to do is kind of create this culture of silence where nobody talks about things and people are afraid to ask questions. We want the children to think about things and talk about things and ask questions and see race and diversity in a positive way. Why else? Racialized people often don't have a choice. And that word is really important, racialized. And what I mean by that is people who do experience racism and people who are viewed predominantly through a lens of race. So when you are a person of color and you are racialized, i.e. you do experience racism on a regular basis, you often don't have a choice in the matter, and you often experience racism really young. And so lots of people say to me, well, if I had to experience racism as a child, then I'm sure another child can handle talking about it, which I have to agree with. People are quite surprised when I say to them the first time within my living memory that I experienced racism, I was 4 years old. And I remember it very, very clearly. And I think to myself, you know, if a child can experience racism at that age, then surely we can have conversations to prevent that from happening. So that's a really important thing to take into consideration. People of color often have these conversations from a really young age. So, you know, before you start school, your parent or your guardian or whoever usually will say, well, you know, make sure that if someone says this to you, you tell the teacher. And if somebody gives you a hard time, you come and tell me, because of the things that they went through in school, which is fair enough. And so we can't continue, and when I say we, I mean people of color can't continue to have those conversations in and of amongst ourselves. We need everybody to be on the same page with regards to racism. And finally, that brings me on to my last point as to why this is so key. The conversations that we have at home and in our communities are really important. As a teacher, I remember time and time again children coming into school and repeating really awful things that they'd heard at home. And that's not to say, you know, you should censor yourself so that your child doesn't copy you. It's you should really think about what you're saying so that you don't pass on those beliefs to your children, especially if they are negative beliefs. We're trying to interrupt that. So this is why it's really important to talk about these things. Let's talk about children and age and race and racism. As I said a couple of moments ago, one of the most common things that I get told is, you know, children don't see race. And that's actually technically not true. And I did a little bit of research and I came across a report by a person called Evan Apfelbach. And he is from Boston University. And in 2020, there was some literature that he wrote in which he looked into the age at which children recognize differences in skin color. And I was quite taken aback by this because I thought it was going to be kind of toddler age, 2, 3 years old, but it's not. Apparently, children begin to notice differences in race from the age of 6 months old. And when I read that, I thought, gosh, that is incredibly young, 6 months old. And I thought that's interesting. I wonder when children start to make negative associations. Because if we're saying that children, you know, start to recognize that from the age of 6 months, it's obviously not negative. It's just pure science almost. They see the physical differences and they can recognize the differences in skin tone. But my question is, when does that start to become associated with, you know, when do certain skin tones start to equal, you know, negativity? So I'm curious. That's something that I've not found the answer to. But as I said, in my experience of being a teacher, it was surprisingly young. Working with children in nursery, it was something that would come up time and time again. And not just, oh, you know, this person has different skin to me, or this person, you know, you don't have the same skin tone. It was comments like, this person is brown, their skin looks like mud, or their skin is dirty, or their skin is, there's something, you know, there was always a negative kind of point added to the recognition between differences in skin tone. And so if that's the case, if children are starting to recognize differences in skin tone this young, and then they are starting to kind of add those negative associations to darker skin tones from kind of toddler nursery age, then we really need to talk about it as soon as we can. Lots of people say to me, but my child's not like that. We're not like that. We don't see color. And I think that's a really interesting point. It's a very well-intentioned point, a very well-intentioned comment, but it's not helpful. As I said, children do see race, and people do see race, and that includes children. And that's absolutely fine. I'm going to keep reiterating this. There's a difference between race and racism. It's fine to recognize that somebody has a different skin tone to you. That is a fact of life. There are 8 billion of us on this planet, and we do all have different skin tones, and that's fine. Let's not pretend that that's not a fact. What's not good is when children start to behave badly towards people who don't have the same skin tone as them or are different from them in any way. So when we say we don't see color, is that really true? do we really not recognize that there is diversity in the world? Because that's not a good thing. The diversity in the world and the difference of skin colors is wonderful, and we should celebrate that, and we should, you know, uphold that. And I think that's really brilliant. So let's reiterate, yes, and let's tell them, yes, people do have different skin colors, and it's really important that we treat everybody fairly. So, another thing that I kind of want to address is the idea of a child becoming preoccupied with race if you talk to them about it. I worked with children for a very long time, and I still continue to do so. And I've never known a child to become preoccupied by race. It's never happened in my experience. Children are so resilient and they're so brave. And often it's the case that they will see something or they'll ask a question about it and they'll be curious for that moment. And then they'll kind of say, oh, okay. And then they'll keep it moving. So I wouldn't worry about your child becoming preoccupied by it or hyperfixated by it, because that doesn't tend to happen. If they want to ask more questions, let them, absolutely let them. And it's good if they're asking questions, because that means that we can give them informed answers, as opposed to, you know, them not asking any questions and then going onto the playground and somebody telling them something that's quite uninformed. So don't worry too much about that. They are brave, they're resilient, and we need to give them a little bit more credit. They'll be absolutely fine. So that's kind of the reasons and the rationale and the intentions behind this webinar. And you might be thinking, okay, so where do I start? Where do I go from here? Books. Books are your absolute best friend. And I say this as an avid book lover. I love reading. If you want to find me, I will probably be curled up somewhere with a book. And two books that I have encountered and I've read that I think are absolutely brilliant are the two that you see on the screen right now. The first one is called Wish We Knew What to Say, Talking with Children About Race. And it's by an amazing woman called Pragya Agarwal. And I apologize if I've mispronounced that. And it's absolutely fantastic. It literally breaks down by age how to have these really difficult conversations. The second one that I would highly recommend is called Bringing Up Race, How to Raise a Kind Child in a Prejudiced World. And again, it really goes into, you know, having these awkward and uncomfortable conversations with your children and how to kind of prioritize kindness and say the right thing. So if we are going to start with any two books in terms of understanding racism ourselves as adults, I would 100% recommend these two. They're absolutely brilliant. Once you have read them, and if you do have the opportunity to read them, I think it will arm you with the knowledge and the confidence to start those conversations. So this is a really good place to start. So how do we have these conversations? I want to break this into two categories. I want to talk about talking to children aged 3 to 7, so the younger ones, early years and key stage 1, talking to them about race, and then I'm going to come to talking to older children about race. And when I say older, for the sake of this webinar, I mean children aged 8 to 11. I've kept it primary school age. So how do we have these conversations with younger children?
Guys,
really important to talk to your children about
what have I asked you to do?
And I think when we're saying difference, I don't just mean difference in terms of skin tone, I mean difference in its wholeness, in its totality. So what I tend to say when I'm talking to really little ones about this, I like to say, we are all different. Our skin colors are different. Our eye colors are different. We could be small or big, tall or short. We could have curly hair or straight hair. We even have different hobbies. So it's just getting them to recognize that it's not just skin tone that's different in human beings, it's all of the aforementioned features. And also it's the things that we enjoy doing. So who we are as people is different. I also like to pose the question, what do you think it would be like if everyone was identical? So this is where the critical thinking comes in. And usually the children are completely mortified by that idea, the idea of everyone being a clone or a twin or what have you, not a twin, identical, and what have you. And the reason I said twin was because sometimes there's always a child who says, "Oh, but what if you're a twin? Doesn't that mean you're the same as someone else?" And I always say to them, "Yeah, it does. Like there could be lots of similarities between you and your twin, but still, you're not exactly the same. You probably do enjoy different things and have different personalities. So it's really important, I think, to big up the idea of difference and diversity. I love to start here because it gets them thinking about diversity, not just from skin tone, from the perspective of skin tone, but from a different perspective as well. Diversity of size, diversity of interests, and so on and so forth. So talk to them about that. And I think what some parents find really difficult is when children say it really bluntly or at a time where it's not particularly the right time. And I think we've all been in that situation where you're with your child and, I don't know, maybe you're on the bus or you're walking down the road and they will literally have no filter and they'll point and they'll say, "Why is that person?" And then they'll ask their question. I think in that situation, it's really important, first of all, to say, okay, yes, thank you, but remember what we said about pointing, we don't point, do we? So first of all, let's not forget manners, make sure we're not pointing, but then just tell them and say, yeah, you're right, that person does have different skin to us, and that's because we're all different, and people have different skin colors just like they have different eye colors and hair textures and things like that. Just tell them, because otherwise you've shut that conversation down, and it could have been a really good way to start. And as I said, I know it's awkward, it's uncomfortable, you don't want your child pointing and staring in public, but children don't do that out of malice. I found, I think they do it out of pure curiosity. And I think we should entertain that and just say, yeah, you're right, people do have different skin colors. And if they ask, if they really want to know why, and say, tell them, because people from different parts of the world, if your family comes from, you know, whatever country it might be or whatever region of the world, then sometimes people in those countries have darker skin, and the reason they have darker skin is to protect them from the sun. It's a fact. Okay, so for me, for example, I've literally had a child ask me, "Why do you have dark skin?" And I've literally said, "Because where my family come from in Africa, my ancestors," and that's a really nice word to introduce, where my ancestors come from, it was really, really hot. And to protect them from the heat, they had a chemical in their body, they had something in their body called melanin. So the more melanin you have, the darker your skin. And I usually give the same answers when children ask me, why is your hair curly, or why does your hair go upwards? And I say, because where my ancestors came from, it was really hot. And it was important to keep my neck and my back cool. And so people from that part of the world, our hair tends to grow upwards so that our spine and our back and our neck are kept cool. And that is the factual scientific answer as to why people have different hair textures and why people have different skin tones. So literally just tell them. If you don't know the answer, don't make anything up. Say to them, I'm not sure, but I think it's really wonderful that people have different skin color, don't you? And usually they will say yes. So talk about it in a positive way. Don't make anything up. You could even say to them, "Oh, why don't we go and find out? I'm not entirely sure, but I think it's really cool that people are different. But when we get home, why don't we try and find out about that? And let's try and find an answer to your question." So making sure that it's constantly positive is also very important. I think it's also really important to talk positively about the human experience, and the fact that even though there is all this difference and diversity in the world, we are all special and we are still all human. Everybody deserves to be treated well. It doesn't matter if they have different skin color to you, or different eye color, or different hair texture, or they're tall or they're short. That doesn't matter. Everybody is a human and deserves to be treated well. I like to ask children, how would you like it, or how would you feel if somebody wasn't nice to you? And again, they are empathetic creatures and they have that understanding, and they tend to say, oh, actually, I'd feel really sad. So saying, how would you like it if someone decided that they didn't want to play with you because of your hair? And they understand and they get how, even at this young age, they get how ridiculous that is. And they say, oh, I'd be really sad, I'd be really upset. And from that, we can say, exactly. So it's really important that we don't treat other people like that, because then you'd make them feel really sad, wouldn't you? But constant reaffirming of the human experience and saying we're all special, we're all unique, we are all human beings. And like I said, this isn't just applicable to race, this is applicable to so many different things. So when I'm talking to the young ones about diversity, I literally do tell them about diversity of race, diversity of size, diversity of ability. We talk about people who are wheelchair users, because again, these are all things that they are going to encounter in real life, and they need to be prepared for that, and they need to know that this is not a negative thing. It's really quite a wonderful thing. One of my favorite phrases is this: it's never okay to treat someone differently because of the way they look. It's never okay to treat someone differently because of the way they look. Sometimes I change the wording of that and I say it's never okay to treat someone badly because of the way they look. And there are loads of books that explore this. And I think it's really nice, and I'll tell you some titles later on that I think are quite useful, to look at books, because you have these physical representations, you've got these illustrations there where a child can literally see how this person feels. So if we look at this illustration, this boy, obviously, he looks quite different to the other children, and he looks really upset. And so I think when you're looking at books, talk about the pictures and say, how do you think how do you think he feels? How do we know he's sad? And what are these children doing? And usually the kids say, well, this one's laughing at him, or this one's pointing at him. And then usually someone will say, well, I don't know if the girl is happy. I can't see her face, but I don't know if she's happy. And they'll say, oh, this one's also pointing at him, and that's not nice. But I like to keep it generic for the reasons that I told you a second ago. This is a universal concept. It's not okay to treat someone differently, badly, because they have a disability, because of their race, because of their size, because of what have you. So I think it's nice to keep it quite generic, so that they know that this is applicable to so many different situations. If we want a focus, you can absolutely change the wording of this and tell your child it's never okay to treat someone badly because of their skin color, because of their skin color. So literally explicitly tell them that. That's also absolutely fine, and they get it. They absolutely get it. At this age, I tend to say skin color rather than race, because I found that they don't really understand that word until they're about 8, 9 sometimes. I think it's just, I'm again, that's something that I need to look into, but I've genuinely found, and I've worked, I've had these conversations with thousands of children, they don't understand the word race, and they don't make the connection between race and racism. So I tend to say skin color. I also tend to say, because of religion as well, the way they pray, if they go to a mosque or a synagogue or, a temple, it's really important that it doesn't matter how somebody might celebrate their faith. It's really important that we don't treat them badly, because I think that's another thing that we need to encourage children to think about. Treating, religious intolerance, um, it's rampant. And so when we talk about racism, and when I talk to them about racism, we talk about that as well. So making sure that they know you don't treat somebody badly because of the way they look, because of their skin color, and because of the way they pray or the way they celebrate their faith. How do you know if your child is, saying or behaving in a way that's problematic. I found that these are the sorts of things that young children, and again, I'm talking 3 to 7, tend to say that are quite problematic. And I think it's really important to look out for these behaviors. So making fun of the food someone eats. This is something that's so common with school-aged children. And usually the scenario is this: somebody will come to school with a packed lunchbox, or you'll go on a school trip and they'll have a packed lunchbox, and within their lunchbox, they will have a food that is culturally significant. Another child has never seen this food before, and children, like, they tend to do that. When they don't recognize something, the immediate reaction is to laugh at it. And I think that's something that we should nip in the bud. Curiosity, absolutely. I think, fine, ask. You can ask someone, what are you eating? But let's stop children from laughing at other people's food. Really, really unpleasant. Oh, apologies. I've just knocked the camera out. Just bear with me 1 second. Okay, am I back on screen? Sorry, everyone. Apologies. Oh no, have I lost you?
It's just your photo, Pula.
This is my photo. Okay, I'm gonna go back to I'm gonna resume screen. Can you see us? Can you see the screen now?
We can see your presentation.
Okay, brilliant. That's fine. You don't really need to see me anyway. Apologies. So as I was saying, I think it's really important that we talk to children about that, and we tell them that actually, first of all, this is London, and there are people from all over the world in this city, and people who have heritage all over the world. And actually, food is scarce. Not everybody has food, so it's a special thing. So when someone does have food, I think we should just be grateful that they get something to eat. And off the back of that, talk about the fact that, in different countries, people eat different things. If you've been abroad, that's something that you can have a conversation about. And you can say, oh, remember when we went to Italy, and what did we eat in Italy? They might say something like pizza or spaghetti, or what did we eat when we went to this place? And talk about that fact and get them to recognize that that's just the way life is. People eat different things. It's really important that if they do make comments and you know that they're making comments or they're doing it in front of you, it's really important to call that in and say, that's really not nice. Food is really special, and actually that's special to someone else's culture or their family. So it's really important that we don't laugh at them, and we don't laugh at that. That's not nice. Children this age also tend to make comments on religious and cultural clothing. So again, I'm talking about things like hijab, I'm talking about things like tupi, I'm talking about things like kippah. Religious clothing, again, it's a fact of life. Some people have different religious clothing, and it's really important that we explain that to them, and we also call them in. And if you see or notice your child laughing and pointing, tell them no. Just tell them, that's really not nice, and we really shouldn't do that, because you wear special clothes for special occasions, don't you? And sometimes people do things differently to how we do things at home, but that doesn't mean it's bad. Actually, we need to remember to be respectful. Children this age also like to refuse to sit with other people. And this is a really tricky one, because people often say to me, oh, well, are they not allowed to choose their friends? No, that's not the point. They are absolutely allowed to choose who their friends are, as long as it's not based on something like race or religion or cultural background and things like that. Give children the agency to be friends with whoever they want to, but if they say to you, I only play with so-and-so because we're both this color, then that's a conversation you definitely need to have. And you need to say, that's not very nice. You need to try and be friends with everyone. Why don't you try and play with someone else tomorrow? You never know, they could be really nice, and then you've missed out because you've decided you don't even want to give them a chance. Does that sound fair? And the same again goes for not just skin color, but hair, religion, or the language another child speaks. Excluding children from play and friendship groups. Now, again, children are allowed to choose who their friends are, but let's please make sure that they're not doing it solely based on the aforementioned features. And this one, people are going to get a little bit annoyed with me about this one, but sometimes parents can play into this. I have, as I said, I've been a teacher, and I've seen and I've literally heard parents say, no, you know, we're only inviting these people to our birthday party. And again, that's something that I never really had control over. You were allowed to invite whoever you want to your birthday party, but think about breaking cycles, and think about breaking that cycle, and think about your child being a more open human being and a more global citizen. And think about what that looks like, and think about what that means. I just think it's quite unfair to give children that, you know, if you yourself are holding prejudices, then let it end with you, and don't pass them on to your children. So let them invite who they want to their party. Children this age also like to compare deeper skin tones to unpleasant things. This is so common. I get contacted all the time about this issue. You know, this child was compared to mud. They've been compared to poo. That's the other one, which is really horrible. That is not acceptable, and that needs a serious conversation. And the conversation needs to be along the lines of, that's really not nice. How would you feel if someone said your skin looked like something nice? Because they know that those two things are not nice, and that's why they've chosen those two things. It might not even be deliberate. It might be just, I don't know, subconsciously they've chosen them, but the point is to hurt somebody's feelings by saying those things. And you just need to be really open and frank with them and say, how would you like it? That's not nice, is it? And moving forward, we need to make sure that we don't say that again, because I think you've really hurt their feelings. So these are the sorts of behaviors that I think should be looked out for. Let's talk about books for younger readers. There are so many books out there. Luckily, things have changed massively within the past couple of years in terms of there being diversity in books. But here's a list of some that I think are absolutely brilliant. Two Eyes, a Nose and a Mouth covers the issues that we spoke about, just celebrating diversity. A is for Activists is quite a nice one. It's quite empowering, and it's an alphabet book. Color of People is also a really lovely one. It talks about diversity in the world. Mixed is fantastic, because I found that people of mixed heritage often seem to be left out of literature. But luckily there's a push in this direction of having more representation for mixed people of mixed heritage. The Crayon Box That Talked is hilarious, and I absolutely love it. It's all about the importance of working together as a team and recognizing that everybody has their own kind of function in life and is important in their own way. An oldie but a goodie, Elmer by David McKee. Fantastic book, Elmer the Patchwork Elephant. Happy in Our Skin is very empowering, very kind of like, it's very affirming. I like that one. Amazing Grace by Mary Hoffman. This is an interesting one. This one's been around for a while, but I like Amazing Grace because it actually explicitly discusses racism. I'm sorry, I'm going to give you a little bit of a spoiler, but essentially part of the story is a girl who wants to play Peter Pan in the school play, and someone literally says, she's a black girl, and someone literally says to her, no, you can't because of your skin color. And it's quite shocking, because I think that was Amazing Grace was one of the first books that I read where I was thinking, oh my gosh, this has never been so clearly addressed. But it's a good talking book, and I found that year two, specifically year two, as in 6 and 7-year-olds, really tend to like that one. So you can give it a try. Racism is a non-fiction book. And it's quite a little one, but it explains racism in a really child-friendly way. And then we've got What is Racism, which I believe is a Lift the Flap book, if I'm not mistaken. That was something else. I think it's an Usborne book. But it's brilliant, and it talks to you about all the things that we mentioned earlier, and it talks about, you know, melanin, and it talks about genes and your heritage and your parentage and things like that, and it's a really brilliant one. So these are ones that I would recommend for children of that age. But I want to move on. I would like to move on. I want to talk about how you have these conversations with older children aged 8 to 11. So at this age, children generally tend to know and recognize and understand when racism is taking place, but they might not be able to articulate it. So if you give them a book or you give them a scenario and you say, you know, what do you think is happening here? They know what it is, especially year 3-ish, because they're just coming out of, you know, infant school age. They know, but they might not always be able to say, oh, by the way, that's racism. And that's fine. And I think we need to kind of step in and have conversations with them about what racism is. And this is when it's a good age and good time to start introducing that vocabulary. So as I said earlier, I've just found that 3 to 7-year-olds do not understand the idea or the word race, or you'll tell them and they'll just forget it straight away. So I tend to say skin color. But with this age, that's when I start, year 3 and above is when I start to introduce the term race, and I explain to them that, you know, race is just another way of describing skin color. But I also like to explain that it's not really a thing, that humans are 99.99999% similar. But so it's not a massive deal in terms of being a human being, and it doesn't make us different. If we looked at humans of all different races, we'd be the same. We'd have the same bone structure, probably. We'd probably have the same similarities in so many ways. So it's not, you know, in terms of being a human, it's not the most important thing ever. I think it's also important to explain at this point, particularly with years 5 and 6, so we're talking 9, 10, 11 years old, that racism isn't just explicit hate crimes, because at that age, I found that they think racism is, you know, really big things that they've seen on the news, which it is, but it's also smaller things. It can happen in school, it can happen when you're walking down the road, and that's not to scare them, but it's just to inform them that actually it's just as bad when it is, you know, when it is in school, or it is when you're walking down the road. Encourage them to share their feelings about race and racism without shaming them, or, you know, without them feeling embarrassed, and say to them, you know, how do you feel about this? And have those conversations. If you haven't started to have conversations with your child from a young age, as I suggested, please don't panic. It's not too late. You can still have those conversations with them. And actually, you can go back to some of the things that we were saying earlier and use them with your older children as well, and say to them, you know, the world is full of different people. And part of that is that we have different skin colors, we have different religions, we have this, we have that. And you can use some of those tips and tricks with the older ones too. I would like to talk about books for older readers. So this reading list, this is kind of like an abridged version of a reading list, which I'll send to you later on. But there are a couple of books that I have found to be really interesting. The first one, this book is Anti-Racist by Tiffany Jewell. I think it's fantastic, but I'll be honest with you, I think that works with a mature child in year 6. So I would say that's not for year 3, 4, 5. I think it's a mature 10 or 11-year-old, because it's really informative, but it goes into a lot of detail, and you really need to know your stuff and kind of have that emotional maturity to deal with that book. But it's brilliant. Can I Touch Your Hair? Poems of Race, Mistakes and Friendship is a really lovely one about what life can be like for certain communities and people of color, and things like that in poetry form. Freedom We Sing is stunning. It's one of my favorite books. It's a picture book. And yes, I do recommend that older ones read picture books, even though they might say to you, no, I read chapter books, I'm too big for picture books. This one's a really, really good one. And it has this kind of hidden musical message in it, which I don't think the younger ones necessarily will pick up on, but I think it's a nice one to look at with your child and see if they can recognize the rhythm and the beat of the book. It's brilliant. I Am Not a Label by Kerry Burnell is fantastic. And this is about people with disabilities. And again, like I said, I think it's really important to talk about diversity in its wholeness and its totality. And it's essentially a book where, you know, there's a different celebrity or famous person on each page, and they have a disability, and she talks about their life and all the wonderful things that they've achieved. You Must Be Layla is a really nice one. I would recommend that for, yeah, ages 8 and up. And it is about a girl who wears a hijab, and she's a Muslim girl, and it's just about her. It's just about her. It's a really lovely one. The Missing by Michael Rhodes, and this is a really interesting one. This is a book that I think it's really important, and I do really love this book, but again, I think it's for a mature child who knows about the Holocaust, essentially, because that's the premise of this book. The premise of this book is anti-Semitism and the things that Michael Rosen's family went through. And if your child doesn't know about that yet, then perhaps maybe actually this is a good way to have that conversation with them. But you know your child best, I think. And so if they don't know, or you don't feel as though they can cope with that yet, then leave that until they're a bit older and they've learned about the Second World War and they've learned about the Holocaust. I know that not year 2, year 6 tend to do World War II, and they have very brief conversations about things that happened during the Second World War. So again, year 6, but then again, for me personally, I remember learning about the Holocaust when I was in year 5. So it really depends, but just have a look at it and think about it, and think about whether it's age appropriate for your child. And then the last one that I absolutely love is called Front Desk, and it's by Kelly Yang. And I would say upper key stage 2, so year 5, year 6 for that one. And it is about actually immigration, which I think is a really big topic and is something that lots of children talk to me about, you know, when I do assemblies and things like that for them. But it's a very funny book, and a very kind of, it makes you think. It's one of those ones. What do you do if your child experiences racism? Let's move on. So now that we know how to start the conversations about race and what to look out for, I think it's important to deal with racist incidents. So first and foremost, please listen to them. Please, please, please listen to them. Reassure them and say, I'm really glad that you said that you've told me this, and thank you for telling me this. You know that that's absolutely not true. So it's really important that they know that whatever someone has said to them is total nonsense, because that's what really can hurt. And again, when I've worked with children of all ages, one of the things that I found is that they genuinely start to believe the negative things that they've heard, and they believe that they are true. So it's important to say, you know, that's absolute rubbish. That's not true. You're so beautiful and you're really special, and you're not whatever the person has said. Don't try and explain it away. So don't try and say, oh, well, maybe you misheard them, or, well, actually, what did you say to them in the first place? We are not trying to victim blame anyone here. We want to validate their experiences and validate their what's happened to them. So ask them, tell me exactly what happened, rather than, oh, are you sure? Just ask them to tell you exactly what happened. Contact the school and report the incident. Please, please, please do not feel frightened into silence. Do not feel as though the school won't take it seriously. I know for a fact that they will. I have been working with Rhodes Avenue for quite some time now, and I just did a training session with staff yesterday so that staff know what to do in the event of a racist incident. Please contact the school first. And I say this because I know what WhatsApp groups are like, and I know that things can kind of go around and rumors can be spread, and sometimes you want to contact the parent directly, but I would actually massively avoid doing that, because that tends to just convolute things and make it quite complicated, and it can end up being, you know, quite messy. So I would avoid, you know, starting something with the parent directly or confronting them directly. Go to the school first and report the incident first, and then take it from there. What should you do if your child is the perpetrator? And this is something that I think we need to have an honest and frank conversation about, because some people do like to say, oh no, my child would never do that. You never know. You never know. And like I said, when I was a teacher, things like this used to happen more often than you'd think. And it was always really interesting when I would have to tell a parent, oh, by the way, your child said this today. Usually there was a sense of panic. Panic was the first reaction, panic and denial. So my first point and tip is please don't panic. Because if you panic, that usually leads to defensive behavior, and that's not helpful. Because if I say to you, by the way, your child said this earlier and this happened, and you say, oh no, that couldn't have been, you're panicking and you're not really thinking it through logically, and I get it. I know it's so important to what you want to defend your child, but just hear the teacher out, because I promise you nobody wants to make that phone call and no one wants to have that conversation. Nobody wants to have the conversation with someone's parents to say, by the way, this is what happened during the day. So just hear the teacher out and listen and take a deep breath. Sit your child down and hear what they have to say, and have a conversation about why that wasn't the right thing to do. Like I said, I get it. I know you want to defend your child, but it's really important that we don't mollycoddle children into negative behavior, because what we don't want is a parent who's in complete denial of what's happened, and then you don't have the conversation with your child, and then your child does it again, because you're emboldening them and you're encouraging them if you don't have the conversation. So don't be afraid of them. Sit them down and literally just say, tell me what happened and let's think about this. Was that the right thing to say? Was that the right thing to do? How would you feel if somebody said that about your skin, or somebody called you a really horrible word or a horrible name? Also, please thank them for telling you the truth. This is not praise. We're not praising them for saying or doing something racist. We are praising and thanking them for telling you the truth, because that can be quite terrifying, especially if you know you're going to get into trouble. And children do tend to do this. If they know that the stakes are high, they might say, no, I didn't, and they're lying, and I really didn't say that. And they might very well say that initially, but eventually, if they have been brave enough to tell you what's happened, just say, thank you for telling me the truth. There is a fantastic account on social media. I know for a fact that this woman is on TikTok. I'm sure she's on Instagram as well. It's really terrible that I don't know her name. I will find out and I will send it through to the school. And she has an account called Scripts for Parents. And she made a video earlier on in the year, and she talked about what you should do if your child uses racist language. And I loved it, so I've borrowed it. She says you should inquire, educate, rectify, and reassure. So the first thing you want to do is ask, where did you hear that word? It's important because, it could have come from home, they could have heard you saying something, they could have had a relative saying something, it could have come from school. It's important to get to the bottom of where that language and all those sorts of words came from. Educate them. So don't just say to them, where did you hear that word? Yeah, don't say that ever again, because they need to know why you should never say such stuff like that. So educate them and say, you might not have known this, but that word is really hurtful and we shouldn't use it ever. It's been used by people to hurt others and tell them they're not deserving of kindness. With the younger ones, I say kindness. With the older ones, I say humanity, because they understand that word a bit more. And then ask them, does that sound like something you'd like to be a part of? So even if you were joking, or you didn't mean to hurt anyone, or someone told you it's fine to say, we can still make a lot of people feel bad, scared, and unsafe. Everybody deserves to feel happy and safe in their own skin, don't they? And the words that you choose and the words that we say can help with that. So it's really important to educate them. You don't actually need to go into the nitty-gritty of terrible words and the history of it, especially if you don't know it. I personally would, especially with the older ones, when horrible words and slurs came up, I would literally sit them down and say and talk to them about the history of certain words and certain language and why it's important that we don't. But you don't necessarily have to do that. You just need to let them know how powerful the impact is. So educate them, rectify, encourage them to rectify the situation. Please do not apologize on their behalf. You can say sorry to the child eventually, you can apologize to their parents eventually, but please let your child apologize. This is one thing that I find it's really difficult. Again, when I go into schools and I do this, one of the things that people say to me all the time is, you know, this racist incident happened, but their mum said sorry. They need to say sorry. It's a really important life skill to have. Being able to apologize to people is so important, and we need to encourage them to say sorry. And so tell them you'll need to say sorry to them. Let them apologize first, and then afterwards, if you want to, I think it's actually really nice to go to the parent or the guardian and say, look, I'm so sorry about this. I've spoken to him. I'm massively apologetic. You can rehearse an apology. Again, you might be thinking, oh, well, that's not sincere, but sometimes children need coaching. And so actually you can say to them, okay, tomorrow when you go back to school, you need to apologize. How are you going to apologize? Or tell me what you're going to say to them. And then that gives them an opportunity to plan it and think about it. And, you know, it gives you an opportunity to double check that it's a genuine apology, because sometimes children, we all know, if you say you need to apologize, they'll say sorry in that kind of rude and not very sorry way, especially if they're heated. So give them an opportunity to practice it with you and check that it's a genuine apology. And then finally, like I said before, reassure them this is not the same as praise. We are not praising the children. We are not saying, you know, oh, thank you and well done for saying something racist. That's not what we're doing here. We're saying, thank you for telling me and thank you for telling the truth, because we want to create a culture of safety where they feel as though they can tell you the truth and come clean about things that they've done that were wrong. So that's scripts for parents. Please check them out if you are online in some capacity. Until next week, we are going to wrap up. And the conclusion is, and the takeaway from this session is to talk about difference in a positive way. So, you know, talk about diversity of all those different factors, and talk about it in a really positive, upbeat way. Have these conversations frequently and often. It doesn't need to be a sit down formal conversation. It can just be something you talk about in passing. But I think it's really nice to, you know, have these conversations when you can. Talk about religious difference. I mean, just on the weekend, I saw something so lovely in real life. I was in Tesco and Colney Hatch Lane on Sunday, and there was a sign for Diwali. It said Happy Diwali. And a boy, maybe about 7, 8 years old, turned to his mum and said, Mum, what's Diwali? And she explained it to him beautifully. And he said, oh, wow, that's so cool. I want to do that. And it was such a random act. I mean, it was just in Tesco. And that's what I'm talking about when I say have these conversations frequently and often. Talk about religious festivals. Talk about, you know, how big the world is and how, you know, different we all are. I think that's really beautiful and really important. Educate yourself and do the work. So those 2 books that I recommended earlier on, they're really important books. I'm also going to be sending you some book lists, and they are categorized by age. So there are some books for younger children, aged 3 to 7. There are some books that I recommend for children aged 8 to 11. There are some books that I recommend for teenagers, because I recognize that some people in this watching this video will have teenagers at home. And then there are some books that I would recommend for adults as well. So I think it's really important to, you know, do the work and educate ourselves and make sure that we know what we're talking about before we impart this knowledge on the generation coming up. A massive thank you. But before we log off, I wonder if anybody has any questions. You can unmute yourself and you can ask me a question. If not, feel free to ask me a question in the chat. I'm also going to hang around for a little bit after, you know, after I say goodbye. If you don't want to ask on camera and you don't want it to be recorded, I absolutely understand that. Please ask away. I'm actually going to, I think I'm actually going to stop recording because there's nothing, yeah, I'm going to stop